Welcome to On the Pedals, a Stolen Ride podcast. I'm your host, Imogen Cotter. Each episode, we dig into cycling, the community around it, and the realities of security and crime with the people who live inside these worlds. Our guest today is a powerhouse in journalism who has spent years rewriting the roadmap for how we move through our cities. She is an acclaimed freelance journalist whose vital reporting on cycling infrastructure and road safety has been featured heavily in The Guardian, Road CC, and across major national media. She is also the author of the critically acclaimed book, Potholes and Pavements, a bumpy ride on Britain's national cycle network. Laura has spent her career exposing the gap between high-level transport policy and reality on the ground. She understands the barrier of bike crime on a personal level, having had 6 or 7 of her own bikes stolen over 17 years in London. She's here to discuss how theft impacts public confidence, why secure parking is a missing link in urban planning, and what meaningful change actually looks like. Welcome, Laura Laker.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the lovely introduction.
Yeah, well, we've already done the introduction and then we weren't recording, but Laura was telling me about, Laura was telling me about her bike theft situation in London. I mean, 6 or 7 bikes over 17 years is pretty exceptional.
Yeah, I think, it's almost one every 3 years. If it is 7, I was trying to count through them, but I couldn't do that and talk at the same time. But yeah, it's quite a few. And some were just carelessly locked. So some of them were arguably, not ideal. But I've had a few and I've tried to get some of them back with varying no success, actually, zero success rate of attempts to get the bikes back.
Tell the story. You have to tell the story you were just telling me because it was so like, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to it, like that thing of getting your bike stolen and then seeing it pop up on like Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah. So my first bike in London actually was stolen. And that was something a friend had given me. And then I had insurance at the time. So I claimed on the insurance and I got this sort of blue metallic paint colored hybrid bike, which I loved. And I made friends with the guy in the bike shop and we went cycling across Europe. And I bought the panniers and the rack and all of that. And it was great. And I loved this bike. And I would ride everywhere on it. And I was at a dance lesson on Brick Lane one night, and I remember looking out of the window at one point and thinking, "Oh, it's weird that someone's got the same color bike as me." And basically, it turned out that was the thief riding away on my bike. And I got out, and I was like, "The bike's not there," and I'm just standing there thinking, "This doesn't make any sense." Like, it was there, and now it's gone, and it's just like one of those things where like reality is kind of warping for me, and I'm like, does not compute basically. And I remember sort of sadly walking home and like having to get the bus, which I didn't really like getting. I get travel sick. And I was just like, oh God, my bike. I love that bike. It's so sad. And anyway, so I was like, well, oh well. And a friend of mine who worked at the London Cycling Campaign at the time, he got in touch later that night and said, I think I found your bike. And sure enough, there it was online. And with like the most generic kind of write up about it. It had the kind of stock photo from the bike manufacturer's website, and then fits like for 5'6" to 6 foot, like clearly not their bike. I kind of learned that when someone's selling a bike, they'll have a personal detail about like used for XYZ, ridden for, bit of a squeaky something, otherwise in good order, just like detail, a little bit of detail. But where there isn't, where it's a copy and paste job, that always flags, that's always a red flag for me. So anyway, I was like, I'm going to try and go along. I'm going to try and like meet the person and see if I can get it back. And I was a bit of bravado and I called all my friends. There was one person free, bless her. She was lovely, but, a little bit scatty. So we went along. She had her Brompton. She folded up the Brompton. And I said, if this is my bike, I'm going to give you a little nod. And she's telling me this guy turns up and I'm looking at the bike and I'm like, that is my bike. It's got my bike light on it from the night before. It's got like, you just get to know like the little scratches and the like weird individual things that you've got on the bike. And I'm like shaking with adrenaline and I'm like trying to like just keep him talking so I can like stop shaking enough so I can get on the bike. And he's like, oh, it's really nice. I just rode it over here. Like, obviously it was the first time the little blighter had ridden it. And I was looking at my friend Kim and she just wasn't registering anything. And I was like, yeah, anyway. And I got on the bike and he's like, oh yeah, it fits you really well. Of course it did, because it's my bike. And I sort of did a little ride around and I was looking at Kim and I was like, I could just ride off right now, but I can't leave her behind. She's got her Brompton folded up. He's admiring her Brompton. I'm like, is he going to steal her bike? So anyway, my friend the LCC was saying the new, at the time, cycle task force that the Met Police had set up would potentially come and help me if I called them. So I got a number, but they couldn't come in time. So I had to let the guy go. And I said I'd think about it. And I like remember trying to rally people at the pub, just like, look, this guy's got my bike. If I call him back, will you back me up? And everyone's just like, no way, we're getting involved with this situation. So I kind of eventually I called him back just out of desperation. I'm like, well, I can't let him go. And he said, oh no, I've sold the bike. So that was the end of that. It was so sad. I love that bike. It was like my
Yeah.
first, like the one that the friend had given me was like fine. It was, it was a nice bike, but I just didn't have that attachment to it. Like I'd
Yeah.
chosen this one and we'd had all these experiences together, and it does become quite personal. And yeah, I just remember being really heartbroken about it. And that was my first of many. And it's always like that weird moment where you come back and, the thing that you use every day is gone. And it doesn't, it's like, yeah, it's such a weird moment. But yeah, none of them I've got back. So
It,
sometimes I've just forgotten to lock them. I've like gone
yeah.
away, like got distracted midway through the process. And I've thought, I don't feel like I didn't lock my bike. I go back and it's like, oh yeah, I didn't lock it. It's gone.
My God. And it's so devastating then to get it so close to getting it
I
back.
know.
Then it
I
just
know.
disappears and is gone. I can't imagine it.
I know, so sad. I remember sort of had to go on a work thing. I was sort of still temping at the time, and I had this like crazy early start every once a month for this conference out in the Cotswolds, and I was at Paddington, and I'd zoned out on the train, and I'd like missed my train, and I just like once the train had pulled away, I just sat there on a bench in Paddington, just like weeping. It's
Oh,
like guy. I called up my mum. I was like, "Oh, mum, you won't believe what's happened." And this guy, it's like total stranger, came up with some tissues and just sort of put them next to me on the bench. It was the sweetest thing.
my
But
goodness.
it's really like, it's really sad. And because I was so determined to cycle, I started looking online myself, and I found someone that was like, had a bike that they weren't using anymore. So I sort of pretty much that day, I think, went down to West London and got this really nice bike, which was then stolen 5 weeks later because I didn't lock it in my hallway.
Oh my God. You were thinking your whole way it's safe though. Like I can
You would
understand
think,
that, out in the
yeah.
street, but you would think at home it would be safe.
Mm. And because
Gosh.
of the insurers, they count that as out on the street because of the risk. I mean, there were sort of 5 apartments in this old converted Georgian townhouse, and they had visitors, and I think one of the household were a bit, I don't know, yeah. So yeah, and I remember at the time trying to sleuth that out. Like someone had left an inner tube out in the street, and I was thinking maybe I can like find. I don't know. I feel like if I were like, I don't know, Sherlock Holmes, this would be all I needed to
Yeah. You'd be
pursue
able to
the,
track down the shop where they got it and then like,
exactly.
person. Yeah. God. So did that shake your confidence? Like, it obviously hasn't actually because you still continued cycling and commuting in London. So it didn't shake your
Mm.
confidence to that degree that you would have reconsidered?
No, never. Because once I was into the cycling, like that was my way of getting round. So I think, I'm probably quite an outlier in that sense. And, I wasn't going to be stopped by anything, basically. So yeah, I've had things have happened over the years. Cycling around London, it's generally, I haven't had any major crashes or anything, but theft has been the one thing. And I know that it's a massive issue for people. And I was reading actually the London Cycling Campaign did some research. I think it was earlier this year, and they quoted Will Norman about the big problem of cycle theft in London, because it really, for most people, this will stop them because, why spend money on a bike if it's only going to be stolen? And, it's not free. People talk about cycling being cheap, but it's not if you are on a low income, or you suddenly find yourself having to buy a new one. It's going to be a couple of £100 minimum. Yeah, there was 15% of people who've been the victim of cycle theft stop cycling altogether. 15% is quite high. 20% stop cycling temporarily, and 27% cycle less. So you do kind of make those calculations about where you're going. At one point, I don't know if it's still the case, but around Dalston, there was a really big problem in East London of cycle theft. A friend had his handlebars stolen, and it was on quite a nice road bike. bike from some cycle racks there. And because because it's a road bike, all of the cables had to be cut to get off the handlebars. And so it was an enormous expense for him, and he could afford it. And like me, was very determined. But yeah, Will Norman described it as a theft to like a hole in the cycling growth bucket, which I thought was quite a good term given the impact it has on people. And so yeah, I mean, as long as I've been a cycling journalist, I've been very aware that this is incredibly important. And I think it's one of those things that is much bigger problem than people realize. Because a lot of people just don't report the theft because they think that nothing's going to happen. And, the stats tend to bear that out, even if police are trying. Quite often, there's nothing that can be done. I mean, the last one was stolen in broad daylight of mine. I had my second best lock, stupidly, not the best one. And that was in East London. And I managed to go into the adjacent office building. And they saw the footage of the bike thieves. So there was a scout that came along, and then at like 11:28 or something, the thieves came along with an angle grinder. And then sort of not even four, it was like 3 minutes later, the bike was gone. They cut through the lock and the bike was gone. But so that was forwarded to the police. The kind of facilities person at this office building was lovely. But the police contacted me and said, look, we can't identify anyone from the footage, unfortunately. It's not good enough to see their faces. So, even then, having done my own sleuth work, yeah, it's a difficult problem to solve, it seems.
Yeah, and like it sounds, well, I'm curious what you think, like whether or not the problem has gotten worse, because it sounds like from what you're saying there that there's real method and thought behind the thefts. Like they are
Yeah.
sending scouts in, having an angle grinder. Like, do you think it's a worsening problem in London?
I mean, think it's, I think the stats bear that out. I mean, I think you've got to be careful with anecdotal stuff because obviously my sample of 7 is probably not representative. But I know that this LCC, the London Cycling Campaign survey, was very detailed, and it talked about, just the scale of the problem, both reported, and then it surveyed members and asked them, how much they'd reported. And a lot of them just hadn't bothered. And so it does seem like it's higher. And I think there is that sense that it's quite easy to get away with it. It's a very sort of, as crime goes, it's a very low risk, kind of high reward crime. So if you've got an angle grinder, and I think I've heard London be called the sort of angle grinder capital of the UK, if not wider afield. I mean, yeah, people, you can just get these sort of mobile angle grinders. And really, most locks aren't a match for it. You do have specialist ones that are supposed to resist an angle grinder now. But yeah, I think it's a big problem, and I don't think it's certainly not going away. And yeah, it did seem from the observation of this particular incident that it was an organized thing. That there was a young guy whose job it was to sort of go out and scope bike racks and see which were the nice bikes with the bad locks, and and fish them out that way.
And do you think then, talking about these bike racks, in cities, is the parking adequate for, commuter cities, places like London, places like Dublin? Do you think that the parking, like just these simple bike racks, are enough?
Hmm. I know that some cities are now looking at doing more enclosed bike shed things on the street. And I was in Cardiff a couple of months ago, and they've got a really big cycle theft problem. The last time I was there, they said, don't ride your nice bike, just use the kind of street hire bikes because it's just not, chances are someone will make an attempt on it. And it was one of my favorite bikes, so I took their advice. But now they've got these really nice kind of wooden bike sheds, and you can rent it for like £1 or 2 a day. And I guess if you've got, again, it's not an insignificant cost, but I guess if you're riding a nicer bike and you're happy to pay that, then that's an option. And they're nice. They've got a little green roof on them. And Cycle, who do the bike hangers, the kind of these sort of semi-cylindrical things you see on the street, they do them in city centres now. I think they've done them in Glasgow city centre. So you can just rent them, for a period of time when you're there. But yeah, I don't know, I think I tend to, if I'm choosing somewhere to lock a bike, I would tend to choose somewhere with high footfall. If you're on a back street and there just isn't that kind of natural surveillance, then I think you're obviously more likely to have a bike have something stolen. I left my bike on a back street once, and someone stole my front brake randomly. I got back and I was like, oh, so when I had, there was a rim brake, they just like unbolted it and went away. It was just weird.
It's
But
such an
yeah, so yeah,
inconvenient thing.
tend to choose that. Sorry?
Such an inconvenient thing to then just
Yeah,
not have the front brake on the way home.
I know. I know. I just rode home slowly. I was like, well, thank God I've got the back one still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gosh. And do you think then, I think cycling parking is a huge part of what allows people or like encourages people to cycle or commute in cities. But
Yeah.
like, what would your take be then on the cycling infrastructure? I mean, I have really big issues with it here in Ireland, you know, bike lanes that end out of nowhere that aren't like fully connected. Would you also consider that to be a big barrier when it comes to people commuting or just riding their bikes in general?
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I guess route is only as strong as its weakest link. And I think Manchester's approach many years ago was to sort of talk to people on a very granular level, sort of residents, and get them to look at a map and say, which bits of your walking or cycling route do you find off-putting? And then it was often just like a crossing here or there, or like a missing section. And I think this is something that Hackney did well years ago. They sort of did little filters through streets. So they would close off the end of a street and then, you could cycle through, but you couldn't drive through, and it would reduce through traffic while encouraging cycling. And yeah, and I think those little kind of interventions can be really powerful. Like if you don't really have much of a network, just to sort of start to connect those cul-de-sacs together. And then, yeah, I mean, hopefully we've left behind the era when routes were built and then the junctions were just ignored. I know that it still exists and there's still like a lot of historical examples, but it used to be the case that a painted lane would just end at a big junction, and that's like the most dangerous statistically and the most scary bit. And so, very few people are going to use the in quote unquote good bits, even if it's just a painted lane and not necessarily that good. But it's people aren't going to use it if the scary bits aren't dealt with. But I think, I think there's kind of a lot better guidance from government under Active Travel England. And I don't know what it's like for where you live in Dublin. I don't know if you've got sort of higher standards or
No, no, trust me.
no.
I'm on the west coast of Ireland, and it's
Okay.
a continuously like a point of just, yeah, I suppose contention for me. I can't believe how disconnected the cycle network
Mm,
is in Ireland.
yeah.
The Road Safety Authority in Ireland just released a study where like they compile their findings every year, and 52% of all road injuries with cyclists happened in Dublin. So I think
Oh wow.
we've obviously got cyclists all over the country, but they're, drivers here, where it's more rural, they're more protected just because there aren't as many drivers on the road. Whereas you get to Dublin and nothing is connected. And I'm curious as well what your opinion is about, you spoke about the painted line on the road. For me, I always say like paint is not protection. So what would your kind of is there a country that you would base an ideal off when it comes to looking at bike lanes, and how would they look?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you've got the classics, the sort of Danish and Dutch examples. But yeah, I mean, paint, I think it's actually worse than nothing. It can be, because I think it can encourage people to drive against or sort of up to the line. And if it's a narrow lane, which they quite often are when they're painted, then that, I don't know, that just feels really dangerous. But yeah, I mean, this is not a kind of problem that we don't know how to solve. There are like design standards around the world. In England, we've got good design standards. Wales has got really good design standards. I'm not that familiar with Scotland's, but I'm guessing they're probably of a similar ilk. So it's, you need protection from motor vehicles, from drivers when there's sort of higher speeds or high volumes of traffic. Junctions, you need sort of either like to be moving through a junction at a separate time or physically protected. So yeah, it's a kind of known what works and what doesn't work. It's just really it comes down to politics and whether politicians are willing to take that contested space and and reallocate it to kind of, I don't know, redistribute it among different road users rather than just giving it all over to people who are in motor vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'd be curious with your book, when you were researching for your book about a bumpy ride, Potholes and Pavements, a bumpy ride on Britain's National Cycle Network. What kind of, was there times when you were writing that book and you were looking at the National Cycle Network and just thinking, my God, I'm banging my head against the wall? Or how did it feel to
Yeah.
write that book?
Yeah, I remember sort of going around Cornwall, and I wanted to go somewhere quite rural. And I think from growing up in rural West Somerset, even though I live in London now and have done for a very long time, I remember very clearly what it's like to grow up in in the countryside and have so few choices. And, cycling doesn't feel that safe on 60-mile-an-hour narrow roads. Bus service is often quite poor. You end up having to drive. And I kind of wanted to make the I don't know. I guess I wanted to just see what it was like and kind of make a point about one of the most rural places in the UK. And so I was traveling around Cornwall and there were some lovely bits, but there were also just some weird, random bits. It sort of took you around all of the steep lanes that nobody else wanted to drive along. But I mean, the e bike struggled to get up them with me on it and my luggage. And there were quite a few where I just had to push. And because there's some very, very steep hills down that way. And then, when I got into towns, I would find myself on a pavement which was overgrown and you're kind of getting your arms scratched so you don't go into the traffic. And then I'd go round a roundabout on the pavement and you're basically having to cross each arm of the roundabout junction, and then there's drivers just hurtling round. And there was this one guy I remember in a van just like hurtling towards me. And he was like leaning in his seat, like you would like if you're on a toboggan on a snowy hillside. Like it was like, I don't know, he was kind of treating it like he was racing it. And it was a residential road with someone trying to cross it on a bike. And I was so outraged. I was like, just like riding along, like, why isn't anyone fixing this? I was expecting someone to like the hand of God to come down and be like, this will not do. We must fix this. But of course, no one is, because like the people designing this stuff, they don't cycle. They're just like, oh, we'll just bug it round the edge so we don't interfere with the
Yeah.
drivers. And so, yeah, this is what you get, this like wild situation where you're like, is it safe to cross? And I was in North Wales a couple of weekends ago and I was like, always take my bike with me. It's like a kind of pathological now, basically. I'm like, I've got to take the bike. But it was quite interesting. It's like always quite fun because you're like, what am I going to find? Like, how do you get from the train station to wherever you're going? And yeah, it was another situation where I was like on a pavement on a roundabout. And I was like, which roundabout arm exit is it? And then which side of the road has the pavement that you ride on? The pavement got smaller and smaller and smaller. And I was like, handlebars, like almost brushing the cars coming in the opposite direction towards me. Eventually I had to bail off the pavement because there was no longer any space for me to cycle on it. And then I was on the sort of B road with all the drivers. Yeah, yeah, when you start to ride around and you think that who is it designed for? Was, wasn't designed for a user. It wasn't designed with the user experience in mind. It was designed with what's the minimum viable product we can do. Or it was designed by people who came up with the idea of a national cycle network, and they're like, right, we don't have a lot of money. We're going to have to like improvise. Basically, there's a pavement here. We can divert people along this pavement until the conditions come about that there's funding and it can be improved later, which makes sense. Start with something and then you improve it as you go. It's just that the second bit, the improving as you go, never happens. So sometimes it wasn't even designed for cycling. It's just like, this connects this bit of route and this bit of route. Let's just use this for now. But 30 years later, and even the pavements like deteriorated into like a holy mess, and then there's nowhere really to go. So yeah, it was quite enraging. And my editor, when I was sending her copy, she was like, "It's making me really angry." I was like, "I know, right? It makes me angry too. Why doesn't someone fix it?"
And like, I also think you've made the point there that it's often not, those kind of decisions are often not made with a cyclist even in the room. Do you think
Yeah.
that is a problem when it comes to designing cycling infrastructure, that they maybe don't have as much input from people who are using these roads daily?
Yeah, possibly. And I think, austerity in local authorities has done for a lot of the expertise that they might have had the fact of stop-start funding. So unlike road and rail, cycle infrastructure isn't funded on a regular basis as part of a council's core work. And so you end up, if you're delivering as a council officer, so like an engineer or a planner, and you specialise in cycling, you could potentially just be jumping from council to council as and when the money runs out and then starts again. And it's incredibly inefficient because you have to train and hire people and then let them go. And so when in those between periods, nothing happens. There's no kind of long-term planning. There's no like this bit is our key strategic route. If we delivered a cycle route here, we could help XYZ people, to get around and not have to drive. There's none of that. It's just sort of delivered on a really ad hoc basis. And yeah, sometimes by just road engineers who know about cars and driving and try to minimize the inconvenience to drivers as much as possible. And that's, and that's why you have these sort of crossings for pedestrians and cyclists where you've got like an eternal wait and you've got to keep pressing a button every time you want to cross an arm of a junction. And so yeah, the convenience is all with one user.
Yeah, yeah, and it's often like, yeah, as you say, prioritizing that experience of the driver and not really thinking about how irritating it can be as a cyclist and confusing sometimes. Like if you have a bike lane that ends out of nowhere, there's then the question that you have to make like a split second decision on, oh, do I stay on, do I go off onto a pavement? Do I like merge in with the traffic? Is the traffic going to be annoyed? And then the drivers are asking the same
Yeah.
kind of question. And
Yeah.
I mean, something that I've thought for a while as well about, and obviously I'm sure you've experienced it in journalism, is that often the media will maybe stoke the fire between cyclists and drivers to make it a bit more
Yeah.
divisive. Is that something you've come across in your work as a journalist?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long-standing problem, and I think just like the way that media is funded means that if you get people to click on something, then you get more advertising revenue, and it's all kind of driven by algorithms, and so yeah, if you get people angry, then they will click on stuff, and I mean, even there's even a couple of one cycling website that now kind of does this almost like anti-cycling clickbait headlines. And it's frustrating to see because you just think, who is this helping? And what's the purpose of this? It's just to get clicks. I don't know. Yeah, as a journalist, I always struggled with this sensationalist headline stuff. I mean, it just, it just feels really deeply unhelpful and kind of the opposite of informative. It's just kind of making our little rage monkeys jump up and down for a bit, um, and then just making everyone a little bit angrier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it makes it harder cyclists for drivers to see cyclists as just the same as the drivers. They're also just trying to
Yeah.
get home and,
Yeah.
get home from their day at work, and
I
I
know.
often think that there's maybe that disconnect is, like, exacerbated in the media.
Yeah, yeah, there's a sort of drip, drip, drip of kind of, I don't know, just, I don't know, irritation or, that's being stoked. And I think, it does affect people. We are influenced by what we read and what we see. Yeah, the kind of CEO of the Walk Wheel Cycle Trust who just left after a decade, Xavier Bryce, he has this nice kind of philosophy about the National Cycle Network, the shared path bits. And I think shared paths are fine in rural areas where you get fewer users as long as it's well designed. They don't really work in cities where it's busy. But he has this thing about, if you have these paths where everyone gets together and you might come across people that you might not see otherwise in life, that it's a way of bringing people together. And it's a lovely idea, I think. Just that idea of kind of sharing a space and encountering people and trying to like humanize each other. And I don't know, I guess it's like people watching a little bit, and you see all sorts hopefully, if something's well designed, you see all sorts of people using it and
Mm,
enjoying nature, enjoying wherever it goes.
yeah.
And yeah, I always thought that was a really nice concept. It's a bit of an antidote to all of that.
Yeah, and I think it also gives, different communities a chance to, you'll come across kids out on scooters, people out horse riding. We've greenways in Ireland where you come across all of that, and it's not, and at any stage, I never feel like unsafe. It just feels like such a, like you say, community coming together. And I suppose, yeah, like you've just mentioned there about the, antidote to all of the maybe the bad points about cycling or being a commuter, which is like the lack of cycling infrastructure, the dangers sometimes. I wondered what gives you optimism then when you think about cycling in the UK. Like, is there anything that you think, oh, we're doing that really well and that's improving?
I think one thing that's given me optimism, I mean, maybe not in terms of like national delivery, but just in terms of like people, because I think, it can be quite easy at the moment to feel like everything's really overwhelming. There's so many big problems in the world. But there are some amazing people, I think, working in cycling. And I just finished writing a toolkit for rural path campaigners because one thing I discovered when I was writing my book is how hard it is to deliver routes in the countryside and how important they are. And I met lots of, so I thought, how can I distill some of the learnings from the people who are managing to kind of get behind a route as a community and like, raise funding and raise the profile and kind of make agreements with landowners. And so I kind of interviewed lots of people who've been doing this work and identified what they were doing that, that worked and writing it down into a toolkit. And I think I found a lot of inspiration from them, just these, amazing people who want to make an accessible path for their communities and who are kind of just won't give up. They believe in something and they'll keep trying to make it happen. And I found that really inspiring. I mean, I guess in terms of, policy, I think one thing that gave me hope in the last year was this idea of a national walking, wheeling and cycling network, which Active Travel England came up with. And, it was a sort of city-led plan. And I think even though Dublin's cycle routes aren't great and, there's been like stop starts, I think cities are where some of the best work is happening and sort of getting what it did was get those mayors together and say, well, between us, we're going to make a network and we're going to kind of work out in our own areas, how do we deliver between the mayoralty and the councils and, what are the strategic routes and so I think that work is going on behind the scenes and I think there might be an update on it soon. I think in terms of Wales, in Cardiff, the city there is doing some quite good work, although it's quite slow. Glasgow, when I was there a couple of years ago, are delivering some great routes as well. And so, yeah, I think that cities are really the sort of places that are leading on this. And that's not to say that towns aren't. In Stirling in Scotland, they have like an amazing network that goes through the town and as kind of proof that you can deliver in more rural areas. So I think there are like pockets of kind of good practice where like politicians come together and realize this is such a positive thing for health and for transport and for accessibility and are actually trying to do it. And so yeah, I think there's kind of lots to be hopeful about.
And when you were writing your book and you were going around to all of these different communities and different, people who were making these decisions, were there moments that you saw that cycling was maybe more accessible for certain communities or certain areas that were like prioritized when it came to setting up these networks or the cycling infrastructure in general?
Yeah, I think in terms of accessibility, I think things are generally a lot better than they used to be in terms of kind of wheelchair accessibility or like hand cycle accessibility. I think there's still a long way to go, and Wheels for Wellbeing, the charity, would say, there's still quite a long way to go. But I think there's a lot more kind of consideration of different people's needs. There was one really lovely project up in Scotland up in Glasgow, and there was a sort of great big bridge spanning three different communities across a canal, and they got together. The Stockingfield Bridge, it's called, and they got together different parts of the community. There was like a disabled artists group called Possibility, and there was a sort of an artist who wrote the names of people who'd been kind of part of this area's history, and then there was yeah, sort of sculpture that was created by the community with lots of little tiles that people got to kind of make themselves that were then fired and put onto this sort of Scottish mythical beast. And it created a sort of very welcoming community space out of what had been quite an isolated place where men went to drink, basically. And that was a really wonderful thing for me. And it kind of showed me how a route can be also a public space and how it can help kind of revitalize and bring people together and start to, have representation of people that you might not otherwise see in the public realm and in art. And it sort of represented the history of the area and this kind of proud manufacturing tradition with tiles and ceramics. And I thought that was a really beautiful one.
Yeah, it kind of gives you hope, I suppose, like when you're able to see bad things, and we're often hearing bad things that are maybe not the best or prioritized within cycling. And then you get to see that actually it's a really beautiful sport, mode of transport that just brings people
Mhm.
together. And it has the ability
Yeah.
to do that if you like focus on it and nurture that part of it, that can grow. And like you say, it can make these lovely like community spaces where you can meet, little kids out riding their bikes, their scooters. And yeah, I think that's a lovely aspect of it that I hadn't really considered until you were saying it there.
Yeah.
So nice point.
Yeah. And it's really nice because, well, Sustrans now, the Walk Wheel Cycle Trust, one of the things that they always did, and I think was in their original lottery bid that gave them the funding to sort of initiate the network, was that it had kind of artwork and and that's a lovely thing that you see along bits of network is kind of art or sculpture that relates to the local community in some way or the local history, industrial history quite often, or it's sort of I don't know, it sort of grounds you within that space in a way that roads don't do. I mean, you've got the Kelpies beside the big A road up in Scotland somewhere, which I guess is maybe one of the exceptions, but it really is kind of part of that of the National Cycle Network. And I think it's a really lovely element of it, something that I kind of overlooked until I saw this example up in Glasgow and I saw the impact of that involvement of the community and how it helps people to feel ownership over those spaces and how kind of transformative that can be. Yeah, and I think that's really kind of magical. So yeah, it's all credit to the people who organise it, like Scottish Canals and Sustrans Scotland, as it was at the time, and yeah, and all those organisations that got together and thought, yeah, this is we're going to make something that's joyful as well as practical.
Yeah, and think as well, like a lot of things, everything can feel a bit divisive nowadays in media, whereas like when you actually have those moments where you're building a community and coming together, you can see how much more we have in common than we have, different, which I think can be really refreshing.
Yeah.
They've been really lovely answers and really nice to get that, like I said, to get that viewpoint on it that I hadn't really considered before. I have like a couple of closing questions now that we ask each time. And one of them is the first one is if you could change one thing tomorrow to improve cycling in Britain, what would it be? That's a hard one.
One thing. Oh no, I really struggle with like favorites. Top things, one thing, because it's like, how do you choose?
I know.
I think I don't know, I think it needs like one thing that's like really missing is like a long term like basically that it needs to be treated like roads or rail or, like a strategic piece of transport so that it's like we're aiming for a network, citywide network, regional network, rural, that it connects places like the road network does. And that, that is then kind of delivered on a strategic basis. So, obviously city centres are the places where the most journeys would be, but, not to forget the rural areas, but at least there's some sort of plan and long-term, funding allocation towards it. Because at the moment, if you're sort of doing random bits, if it's not part of a big plan, then every single bike lane gets people saying, what about the parking? Why are we building for without that sort of national vision, I think it makes things much more difficult. So that's really what you need, I think. I think the devolved nations need to have those kind of strategic views and like understand the power of because most journeys are short. So the power of being able to do them without needing a car or relying on, patchy
Yeah.
bus service.
Yeah, yeah, really true. I think that it's probably missing in a lot of places is having that long-term vision of what thing, if I have a child, will they be able to cycle to school? Like for a lot of people, probably not, and it's a thing I think about often, especially living in the countryside. would I want my child to cycle to school here if I'm thinking long term? So I think that's a really good point about having that long term plan that's not just, I wouldn't say applicable to Britain. I would say that's global an issue. Okay, and the final question then I would ask is for you, what would success look like in 5 years' time when it comes to cycling, transportation, and your journalism?
This is another kind of question that I don't feel like success. I guess it would be sort of in terms of cycling, sort of delivering, just setting this up so that there's like a national, and I was involved in an open letter around the cycling and walking investment strategy in England last year, late last year, I think. And yeah, just saying that we need to have like, a map and then like, setting out what, you know, starting to deliver it within 5 years. And I think that's needed, like an actual map, and then, funding to make that map a reality on the ground. In terms of me, I mean, I just sort of I just sort of stumble from one project to the next, really. I've just been very lucky, I think. I wouldn't mind writing another book, but I don't have any ideas. So it was quite fun though, getting to travel around, talk to people and write. I think I consider myself very lucky. I get to do what I like doing, and
Yeah.
yeah, sort of interesting projects, seem to sort of come along, and different, apply for funding and things. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess carrying on.
Yeah. Well, I think it sounds really incredible what you're doing, and also that you've been able to go out, see all of these projects that show what is possible. And that's just through, cycling, bringing people together. So I think it's really your passion shows. And yeah, I wish you many years of safe cycling ahead and no more stolen bikes. That's what I wish for your bike route.
Just come to consider it a London tax at this stage, but the safety is good. Yeah, it's a good one, and you as well.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Laura. It was really great to chat with you, and I'm sure everyone will take something meaningful away from this podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Imogen.